So I'm here today to introduce to you a friend of mine, Dr. Colleen Shogan. She's the nominee to be the archivist of the United States, and I believe her to be a person who will honor that past, who while leading the institution into the future. I've known Colleen in a personal and professional way for several years, and I'm here to speak of her qualifications and background to fulfill the role to which she has been nominated. In addition to her professional experience, she is a published author. I would recommend her books. She's a mystery murder author. Very, very good and very exciting to read because they're all on Capitol Hill.
I believe that transparency with this committee, I want to be responsive to requests if I am confirmed as Archivist of the United States. Once you have my commitment that I will work with you and members of this committee to be as transparent as possible. Thank you.
Let me start with you, Shogan, if I could. You have talked throughout today's hearing so far and in your pre-hearing Q&A about how much it's important to be a nonpartisan leader. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
And so if you're confirmed, you will attempt to stay politically neutral in your decision-making. Is that fair to say?
Yes, Senator.
Fair characterization of your views, I should say.
Yes, yes.
So I was troubled, I have to say, by this article that you wrote that Senator Portman asked you about a minute ago, published by the American Political Science Association. I have it here, Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, Republican Populism, published in June of 2007. Do you consider this piece to be nonpartisan?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I consider it to be an academic article, publication of 16, 17 years ago, a scholarly piece.
Yeah, let's dig into it a little bit. You write in your paper that to combat allegations of elitism, recent Republican presidents have adopted anti-intellectualism. Mm-hmm. How would you define anti-intellectualism?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. The ability to speak in very plain, common sense terms to Americans.
So you say recent Republican presidents, but your case studies are Dwight Eisenhower and Ronald Reagan, mm-hmm. and then coming up, I think, to George W. Bush. Mm-hmm. So what's the point here? I mean, you say at one point Republicans tend to exhibit anti-intellectual qualities. Democrats, on the other hand, coalesce on the intellectual tail of the continuum. So is the point that Republicans are stupid and Democrats are intellectual?
You know, it is just wonderful to be back in Oregon, and over the last 15 months we've traveled to every corner of the United States. I've now been in 57 states. I think one left to go. Alaska and Hawaii I was not allowed to go to, even though I really wanted to visit, but my staff would not justify it.
Yes, thank you, Senator, for that question. Absolutely not. The point of the article is that the presidents that I featured in it have a rhetorical connection with the American people.
A rhetorical connection that you say is anti-intellectual, and you feature every two-term Republican president, going back to Dwight Eisenhower.
Yes, Senator, I think it's a piece on rhetoric, and it is really looking at how these presidents have been successful rhetorically in their arguments.
Interesting. It's a piece on rhetoric, but you attribute part of the anti-intellectualism of the Republican Party to, in your words, the rise of the religious right. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that. Is it because those voters are stupid?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. Absolutely not. And if I am confirmed as Archivist of the United States, I look forward to welcoming all Americans to the National Archives.
So do you think that people who voted for Donald Trump are anti-intellectual?
Thank you, Senator. I would not make any judgment on the people who voted for President Trump or any other president.
If we fall for, you know, a bunch of okey-doke.
Oh, so you don't think the people who voted for Dwight Eisenhower or Ronald Reagan or George W. Bush, they weren't anti-intellectual? The anti-intellectual rhetoric just appealed to them because what? What's your theory?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. As I said, presidents are able to speak in common sense, plain terms to Americans that they understand.
All around the world. Navy Corpsman Christian Bashar.
So you characterize President Reagan as having, quote, less than impressive intellectual capacities. You said President Eisenhower and Bush were decidedly intellectual. You said Reagan engaged in intellectual posturing. Let's just start with the first one. Less than impressive intellectual capacities. So in other words, it's dumb.
Thank you, Senator. Absolutely not. That was a perception, and it was cited.
I'm sorry, it's a perception by whom? By you? You wrote about it.
No, Senator, that was, and as I said, in the article, that is a perception, but actually in the article, because...
You say Reagan's less than impressive intellectual capacities have been widely discussed. That's presented as a factual statement. You don't even cite for it. This is on page 298. I have your article. Don't dissemble in front of me. So Reagan's less than impressive intellectual capacities have been widely discussed. You're not saying that he had less than, that's not your view?
Thank you, Senator. It is not my view.
And in Creole, Corpsman Burchard responded,
Why did you write it?
Thank you, Senator. That is not my view. My view was focused on his rhetorical capabilities.
That's not what your sentence says. Listen, you wrote an article saying basically that Republican voters are stupid, that Republican presidents deliberately appeal to anti-intellectualism. You roll it all up in this thing called Republican populism, yet you're trying to present yourself here as a nonpartisan.
Obama.
You got Obama phone?
Yes, everybody in Cleveland, low minority, got Obama phone. Keep Obama in president, you know. He gave us a phone.
He gave you a
gonna
phone.
do more.
How did he give you a phone?
You sign up if you on food stamps, you on Social Security, you got low income, you disability.
I have a question for you. How much do you get to come to this rally today?
How much did I get?
How much money?
They ain't give me nothing. I came on my own.
Okay,
We
that's
come
good.
out here and protest this because
Okay.
we need these votes
All right.
for Obama.
In fact, you're an extreme partisan, and your record shows that. You're someone who has denigrated Republican presidents, every two-term Republican president, I hope I'm not leaving anybody out, that has, since the Second World War, and their voters in this lengthy article. I mean, I just don't understand, if you wrote it, why won't you stand behind it?
Thank you, Senator. I will stand by my long experience for over 15 years of nonpartisan service.
You know, this is not just a theoretical set of questions, because as you know, we have seen what happens when you have political activists in the position that you are up for confirmation for. And we are living through that as a nation right now. We are living through the weaponization, the political weaponization of the National Archives, the political weaponization of the Department of Justice, the political weaponization of the FBI, such that half of the people of this country cannot trust those institutions. We're living with a president who calls half the voters of this country semi-fascists, who have said that they are a threat to democracy. This is an elected American president who makes these outrageous, outrageous statements.
We choose truth over facts.
So in that environment, frankly, to have you up for confirmation for this position, which has become very politically charged, in a way I lament. It should not have been, but unfortunately, the past archivists have done what they've done. The FBI has done what it has done. DOJ has done what they have done. And here you are talking about the anti-intellectualism and, frankly, stupidity of American voters.
It was the most memorable time of my life. It was a touching moment because I never thought this day would ever happen. I won't have to worry about putting gas in my car. I won't have to worry about paying my mortgage. You know, if I help him, he's going to help me.
I mean, if that isn't plain to type, I don't know what the world is. I mean, it's basically a self-parody. How can you assure me or anybody watching this hearing, the millions of Americans, 75 million Americans who voted for a Republican in the last election, how can you assure them that you will be truly nonpartisan, given what you have said over a period of years?
Thank you, Senator. I stand by my record of nonpartisan service at the Congressional Research Service, the Library of Congress, and at the White House Historical Association. And I invite anybody to talk to the people that I have worked with for years in my nonpartisan government service.
Mr. Chairman, without objection, I'd like to enter this article, Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, Republican Populism. I'd like to enter it into the record.
Without objection.
I'd invite everybody to read this. You can read the words for yourselves. You can read the entire article for yourselves, and folks can make up their own minds. I think when they do, they'll be really disappointed. I'm deeply disappointed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Dr. Shogan, when you were here last year, a number of senators asked you, including me, a series of questions about article you'd written, public statements you had made on social media that were, I have to say, pretty grossly partisan, and I thought offensive, and you and I went back and forth about it. After that, a number of us asked you questions for the record relating to these statements. I want to follow up on one of them. I, in particular, asked you to give us a full accounting of the public posts that you had made on Twitter. You had locked your Twitter account before you came before this committee. It had been previously been public. I asked you to provide the public posts that had previously been available on Twitter because the ones that we have were pretty disturbing. You responded as follows, and I quote, "My personal Twitter account is comprised of posts about my mystery novels, events at the White House Historical Association, Pittsburgh sports teams, travels, and my dog," end quote. Is this an accurate statement?
Yes, Senator.
I just remind you, you're under oath. Is this an accurate statement?
Yes, Senator.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your Twitter posts then that I was asking you about. On February 18th, 2022, you posted on Twitter bemoaning the dropping of mask requirements for children, including those under the age of 5. Do you remember that post?
No, Senator. Those tweets were in my personal capacity.
No. I asked you, would you give all public posts that you had made on Twitter? You said no, effectively, and you said that your Twitter posts consisted of mystery novels, events at the White House Historical Association, Pittsburgh sports teams, travels, and my dog. And you just told me now under oath that you stood by that. So now let's talk about your Twitter posts. On February 18th, 2022, you posted bemoaning the fact that mask requirements for children under the age of 5, one of whom I happen to have, by the way, had been dropped. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams?
My social media is in my personal capacity,
Answer
Senator.
my question, please, because you've testified under oath that you only posted about your dog and sports teams and novels, and you also said you wouldn't give this committee any of your public posts. So, is your post on February 18th, 2022, bemoaning the lifting of mask requirements for children under the age of 5, who I might just ask all of the data has said is extremely harmful to children, these mask requirements? We'll leave that aside for now. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams? Yes or no?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
Yes or no, Ms. Shogan? You are under oath before this committee, and I have to say, you have placed this issue squarely in record by repeatedly refusing to answer. Yes or no?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
So you're not answering my question. Let's talk about another post.
Senator, you have my commitment that I will work with you and members of this committee to be as transparent as possible.
26th of May, 2022, you talk about an assault weapons ban, retweet a post, ban assault weapons now. Say you agree with this idea that you have to be a certain age to buy so-called assault weapons in America. Is that a post about sports teams or your dog or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post on January 5th of 2021 in which you say that Ted Cruz ought to stay in his own lane and not worry about what's going on in Pittsburgh? This is a reference, I think, to questions he had about the certification of the last election. Is that a post about your dog or sports teams or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post, you remember December 10th, 2020, where you said that you were hoping that President Trump would have his vetoes overridden, and you agreed with the post that he was a weak policy president? Is that a post about your dog or sports teams or mystery novels?
My social media is in my personal capacity.
What about...
If I'm elected president, you're going to see the single most important thing that changes in America is we're going to cure cancer.
Personal capacity.
What about your post on January 5th, 2021, in which you speculated that President Trump would pardon himself next, participating in a conversation about the certification of the Electoral College? Is that a post about sports teams or mystery novels or your work at the White House Historical Association?
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
What about the post? Do you remember this one? I said we seem to be having an incredible case of amnesia, but maybe you remember this one. This is from December 3rd of 2021, in which you advise an individual who goes by Meg on social media that the Library of Congress, you advise this person to complain about religious flags that have been planted on the grounds of the Library of Congress, and you say that they ought to be removed. And you go on to give this person advice about how to complain and have them removed. Do you remember that post?
My social media is in my personal
Do you remember the
capacity.
post?
My
Do you
social
remember
media is
the
in my
post?
personal capacity, Senator.
I have to say, I have been here for 4 years in the Senate. I have never seen a witness stonewall like this before. Never. I've seen a lot. This is extraordinary. Do you remember this post? December 3rd, 2021.
My social media is in my personal capacity, Senator.
I mean, this is unbelievable. And you want to be the archivist of the United States. You lied to us under oath. You lied to us in your QFRs. You just lied to me a second ago under oath, and now you're sitting here stonewalling, not answering questions about public posts that you've made. Are you a lawyer, Ms. Shogan?
No, Senator.
Are you familiar with the Shirtliff case at the United States Supreme Court?
No, Senator, I'm not.
Well, in that case, the Supreme Court held that, in fact, it constitutes viewpoint discrimination for a government entity to remove religious flags from its property when it's opened up the property to allow other people to put flags on it. Exactly the question that you were addressing in your public posts on Twitter. You're giving legal advice, which you're not qualified to give, directly contrary to the United States Supreme Court. I just wonder, does this have to do with your view that you wrote about that the religious right is connected to the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics? Is that why you said what you said about religious flags, that the religious right is a force for anti-intellectualism? Explain that to me.
No, Senator.
Do you stand by your comment that the religious right is part of the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics?
Senator, that article was written. It was about how Republican presidents use common sense terminology to effectively communicate with Americans.
Yeah, in which you said that the religious right, the rise of the religious right is part of the rise of anti-intellectualism in American politics. I just point out that's the article in which you say anti-intellectual, the title is Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, Republican Populism.
Let me start off with 2 words. Made in America. Made in America.
Very nonpartisan. Dr. Shogan, I'm going to ask you again, will you give to this committee your public posts on Twitter? Will you make them available to this
My
committee?
social media is in my personal capacity.
Mr. Chairman, I have to tell you, this is the most extraordinary thing I have seen in my brief time in the Senate. I have never seen a witness blatantly lie under oath like Dr. Shogan has just done to this committee, stonewalled this committee, and just repeatedly refused to answer my questions about her own posts that are in public. For these reasons, I will oppose your nomination, and I strongly, strongly urge this committee to take action on this and force this witness to own up to the fact that she is misleading us right now before our eyes, Mr. Chairman. Before we vote on this nomination, I just want to express my deep reservations with this nominee and explain why I will be voting no, and appeal to my colleagues across the aisle to join me in trying to get relevant documents from this nominee from the Congressional Research Service. This is a nominee who was before the committee last September, I believe it was. We have a pattern from this nominee of stonewalling this committee, misleading this committee, and now she's doing the same with, frankly, very disturbing whistleblower accusations that came to us at the end of last week. I'm sorry, I think it's been almost 2 weeks ago now. Let me just refresh here the record. In September of last year, when the nominee first came before the committee, Senator Portman asked her a series of questions about her statements made on Twitter.
In 2007, you wrote an article entitled Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, a Republican Populism, which focuses on Presidents Eisenhower, Reagan, and George W. Bush. In it, you state that, quote, Republicans tend to exhibit anti-intellectual qualities, and Democrats coalesce on the intellectual tail of the continuum. Would you please explain your views on this and what you meant by that?
In that article, I was trying to explain how certain presidents very effectively, through their rhetoric, were able to communicate with everyday Americans.
In 2018, when they tried to do it, we went to 54 states.
And she then said, do we have that board, guys? She then said the following in response to my question for the record. She said, my personal Twitter account is comprised of posts about my mystery novels, of which she's written several, events at the White House Historical Association, Pittsburgh sports teams, travels, and my dog. It was made private months ago before I was nominated as archivist. Now, we know from the Twitter post that Senator Portman found this is simply not true. It is not true that her posts are composed of comments about her mystery novels and so on and so forth. We know that they are composed of highly partisan statements. When I asked her about this, I gave her a chance to correct this testimony. She said she stood by it. I then asked her, I went post by post, where she criticizes former President Trump, where she criticizes members of the United States Senate, where she expresses highly partisan views, where she suggests that religious groups should not be able to put up religious symbols on federal property, which is, by the way, not in accordance with the Supreme Court case law. And in all of these, she then refused to answer my questions. Now listen, she's entitled to have her views. She can say whatever she wants, and she can say whatever she wants on Twitter. But what she cannot do is lie to this committee. And to say to this committee that her post consisted of this, when we know from Senator Portman's research that's not true, is simply false. That's point number one. Thank you, Vijay. Point number two is after that testimony, a whistleblower, former employee of Dr. Shogan, came forward to my office. We have a normal whistleblower procedure. I'm sure you all do. We followed that procedure. I think she came to us on a Friday. We sat down with her as quickly as we could, following our usual procedure. I then called the chairman about this, said we're going to refer her allegations, I'm saying her because she's allowed her identity to be used, to the committee, which we did. The committee staff had an opportunity to meet with her. I understand they did again yesterday. And I'll just tell you, and I know you all are aware of this because I've sent you all my letter that references the allegations that were made. The whistleblower said that when Dr. Shogan was at CRS, she engaged in partisan conduct and abusive behavior, allegedly, that she allegedly made unsolicited statements of support for political candidates in the workplace, that she also attempted to organize signing events for her book on federal property during work hours for commercial gain. That's the book that features the killing of a Senator Langsford, yeah. Senator Langsford seems to be doing well, though, I'm happy to say. The whistleblower further alleges that Dr. Shogan engaged in a pattern of abuse, retaliation, and persecution, including undermining the whistleblower's promotion, and that Dr. Shogan failed to discipline subordinates who made racially derogatory remarks to the whistleblower. The whistleblower is a woman of color. Now, when the staff, as I understand, asked Dr. Shogan about this, she repeatedly said she couldn't recall, she didn't have documents, and she referred staff to CRS and said you should contact CRS to ask for promotion documents, to ask for documents about her workplace event with her book. So last night, I sent a letter to CRS asking for the relevant documents. And all I would say, drawing to a close now, Mr. Chairman, what I would say is I would humbly suggest and request that we postpone a final vote on this nominee until we get these documents that Dr. Shogan referenced but said she didn't have, she couldn't get us, repeatedly referred us to CRS. So I've asked for them from CRS. I think we should get them and look at them and do our due diligence on these whistleblower allegations. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.